Hi. Yay. Um, so great. Look, we're all finally in. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to give us a second in order to get people in. And thank you for being here. Great to see some of y'all's faces. And we'll be starting in just a second. Okay. Also, just so that you know, we are recording the first part, the first hour of this conversation. And so this area in terms of this breakout in terms of performing arts will be recorded. The second half, which is the breakout rooms, will not be recorded. So please just be aware of right now, everything is being recorded. So I'm just going to go ahead and start because there's a lot for us to talk about and I have a lot of introduction. So thank you all for being here. This event was organized by a coalition of organizations that includes the Community Arts Collective, DanceSource, Houston, Diverse Works, East End Cultural District, Fifth Award Cultural District, Fresh Arts and Arts District, Glass Tire, Houston Arts Alliance, Houston First, Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs, Mid-America Arts Alliance, Engage Houston, Midtown Cultural District, Museum District, Theater District, and the University of Houston, Catherine G. McGovern College of the Arts. So as a general overview of what's going to happen today, we're going to start with some introductions from about, about 10 minutes for introductions. And then we're going to have the panel presentations from about 2:10 to 12:10 to 12:40. And we'll be hearing from Jeanette Cosley, Mark Folks, and Dean Gladden. And then we're going to be opening it up to Q&A after that. So please hold all of your questions until the end, or just go ahead and use the chat room, the chat box in order to put your questions there. Again, we are recording this hour, and so just be aware of that. As I said before, we're dividing into two parts. This part is a panel discussion, and then we'll have a breakout group where the organizations of similar budget sizes can respond and discuss their own ideas on how to move forward. As a note, if you are switching different disciplines, if you're going to go to visual arts or arts education or anything else, it is a different Zoom link. So you're going to have to leave this Zoom and then go into another Zoom call, and you should have gotten that aspect. I'll repeat that information at the end of this. If you are staying with us in the performing arts, no worries about that. Lauren will go ahead and break us out into groups. So there we go. Okay, so in terms of the context of all this, the group of service organizations all have been meeting weekly in order to be thinking about, first we did the arts recovery and the arts fund. And now and since then, we've been trying to figure out what does it look like in order to re-enter, rebuild, and open up. We conceived this event a few weeks ago when the restrictions on social distancing and meeting in person were beginning to open up. Scientific facts at a time were different. And we actually just have new new information from County Judge Hidalgo, as well as Governor Abbott, and we assume that we'll be hearing some stuff more from Mayor Turner in terms of the restrictions are going to be going in terms of there's going to be no public gatherings of more than 100 people. So the information that we had and the facts that we had when we started this idea are a lot different from our facts today. This is, I think, one of the things that why we're trying to do this is that we are trying to uncover process and thinking and approach. This is an unprecedented pandemic in which we are having to adjust to information and facts that we do not know when it's going to end, and facts continue to change. We are continuing to adapt to the information and the best science and best safety protocols as we know. And the idea is that Dean, Mark, and Jeanette are going to be sharing their experiences, and that might be a guideline and a framework for all of us to be thinking how to move forward. It is not a baseline. It's not telling you how you need to move forward. We believe that it's up to you, your organization, your board, individuals, in order to define what is safety, what makes sense for you in relationship to your resources, and what makes sense. But at least I think that what we're going to be talking about today is process? Have you thought about these questions, and what questions have they thought through, and what are their answers? And hopefully that will be a really good guide to you in all this. So I'll be facilitating this first hour. We have Matt Dietrich, who's actually going to be, who is our scribe, and will be taking some notes, and he'll be sharing a Google document with us so that you can see what's happening in that simultaneously. Before we get into our panelists, the outline of the questions today is that what we framed for them is that how has your organization prepared protocols and changes in operations and programs? How has your organization rolled out changes or implemented them, and how are they working so far? And items to consider discussing include security, sanitizing procedures, staffing levels and roles, audience perception of safety, and general safety concerns for artists, audiences, and staff. And I think that with that information, I guess I just also wanted to say that Houston First has been doing surveys in terms of like general impressions of what is safety and how do people feel. As of in June 15th, their results about safety was that we had about 47% of the people who had actually responded to that said that they felt that going out in Houston was safe or extremely safe. And we had about 18% said extremely unsafe, and as of June 15th. The latest survey said that extremely safe and safe has been reduced. There's a lot more people who are unsure, and that the aspects of people who will feel that it is unsafe has actually increased to about 20%. One of the interesting parts about this is that when they're asking visitors or potential visitors what are things that are going to be interesting them about Houston and bringing them here, museums and attractions are 50% of the people. Over 50% of the people responded that museums and attractions are something that's interesting and important for them. Arts and culture is about 33%. So what we are doing and what we are talking about is a significant thing for the city and in terms of our tourism, and it's an important thing for us to actually understand and be able to do this safely. And so with that, I'm going to just go ahead and open this up, and we're going to start with Jeanette, who is with the Ensemble Theater. And I think I have unmuted you. Maybe not. Sorry, technically. Lauren, if I could get your help as to. Sorry about this. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Jeanette, we can hear you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I think this is really great that we're being able to share some information. As far as the Ensemble Theater goes, we looked at the re-entering our building in 3 different categories. One was staff, the public, and then we also looked at the youth, because at the time that we put together the plan, we wanted to do our summer program. But as you know, things are evolving. We have now decided that the summer program has to be virtual. We will not have children in the building. So, but just to give you some idea of, that's how we were thinking about segregating our plans. And as far as the staff goes, we took out everyone's code to enter the building so that we could control who was in the building at any given time. And as we wanted people to come back into the building, that's when the codes were entered in again. But as far as the building goes, we've had our own maintenance guy to actually be the one in charge of sanitizing and doing all of the work that's necessary to keep the building operational while we're going through this. And I have to tell you that being in the Midtown area is kind of a challenge because there are a lot of homeless people. And so, we needed to definitely have him on site every day practically, just so the building wouldn't look like it was abandoned. And that has really paid off. When you talk about, has it worked? Yes, that has worked. We also looked at what was necessary in terms of capacity once we come back into the building for with our shows. We have two spaces that we use. One, with the social distancing, we can only get 50 people in there. And the other space, approximately 145 people in the other space that we have. And to tell you, we really are not looking to have anybody in the building for shows until December. And this virus is going to dictate, whether even that's possible for us. I mean, because we really, first of all, 56%, at least 56% of my audience is 55 years of age or older. And even if we're open, we've talked to a lot of people, they're not comfortable coming out. So we had to take that into consideration, that we have to keep asking our audience questions about what's going to make it comfortable for them to come out. And so that right now, December, like I said, but it could be January that we will have our first show. We have suspended the idea of having any kind of outside events, because that has been a big part of our space, renting out the space to the public for their special events. And we think we can do it on a limited basis after January, but we won't have anybody in the building for a special event on the days that we have our shows. So it's just one thing going on at a time, whereas in the past we could have had 3 different events going on at the same time. So those are some things that we looked at, just being able to handle, again, the security, sanitizing, necessary sanitizing that has to go on. And of course, when you look at what makes sense economically for us to do, and of course, everybody's taking a big hit, and it is no different with the ensemble theater. I think, as far as our general safety concerns, it truly is whether or not we're going to be able to keep people complying with the social distancing, now that it looks like there's going to be a requirement for the mask. We had said in our initial plans that mask would be required, and now it's good to see that the city is saying that that is necessary as well. I was thinking in terms of what else is a concern for us. I think supplies. I don't know if all of us have access to those standing hand sanitizers, but we're really looking for reliable sources for the supplies that we think we're going to need. And that's one thing that I'm hoping that this group, we can share with each other, what where we're getting our resources. And with that, I would like to turn it over to our other panelists.
Mark, would you like to take it from there?
Excellent. Well, let me just first say, I think one of the best things that's come from our current reality is that we're getting to see each other a lot more often. I'm finding that both with our local peers as well as national, so that's really awesome. And second, just want to first acknowledge that we're having conversations, Sixto, as you had referenced, about reopening, but it feels very irresponsible in this moment to be talking about this. So I kind of just want to, for myself, acknowledge the discomfort of the fact that we're talking about plans for bringing together artists and audiences, but recognize that this might be further out than we expected or have been planning for. So we're really considering three kind of core areas of impact from our existing COVID-19 reality. First of that I'll talk about is safety and well-being, then going to move into programming impact, and then finally just financial. So safety and well-being in the days following, I guess actually probably early April, once we knew this was going to be a little longer term, we assembled a task force made up of staff team members from across the organization, all functional areas and positional power, to start work on developing a plan for stages to reopen. Those first sessions were just hosts of questions with very little answers, which was frustrating for everybody who was a part of that group. Ultimately, we started to do some research and realize that thankfully, this really isn't up for us to be creating these policies, but ultimately for us to follow guidance and tools that have been created from other, both government as well as medical and business entities. So I just want to highlight some of the resources that have been really impactful for us as an organization. The Greater Houston Partnership, first and foremost, has created WorkSafe guidelines with 15 steps for reopening businesses. That essentially was the basis of our first plan. We just took exactly those 15 steps and adapted them for our environment. So that was very, very helpful for getting our organization comfortable with returning some employees to work on site. Obviously, we're following county and state guidance as everyone else is, and utilizing the CDC and OSHA guidance. And then finally, for those who aren't aware, the Performing Arts Center Consortium, which is a group of the 30 largest performing arts centers across the country, have developed a guidance that is really specific to our industry. It is comprehensive, and that's been a great tool for us as we now start to create a plan for returning artists and audiences as a next phase. We do have workers who we deem essential back on site at our venue. So those who require tools and resources that are only accessible in the building have been provided clearance to be able to return. And thankfully that has worked for us with no significant negative impact at this time. And as I referenced, we're now assembling plans for this next phase, which is really the much more complicated task of bringing together artists and audiences. We are following the same precautions that everybody else is, and that every single one of you has top of mind, including social distancing, face coverings, hand sanitization, increased cleaning service and scope. So all of the things that are really just kind of common sense. I thought that I would perhaps highlight some of the areas where we have had more deep experience now as an organization, because we've had to address issues as we've moved to reopening. One of those first is creating an alternate work schedule. We realized early that if somebody in our environment were to become positive, that ultimately that would have a negative impact on others being able to return to work on site if they had been interacting with them in person previously. So ultimately, we wanted to make sure that every functional area of the organization was able to maintain, even if a team within that department became essentially unable to return to work on site. So for example, production team who are back working on site, we have a team A and a team B with rotating schedules so that they never interface. And that's something that's going to happen across the organization as we bring back, for example, our marketing and sales team, the box office function. They will have alternating teams so that if one of them is unable to return to work because somebody has been positive, we'll still be able to maintain that function for the organization. We had a lot of conversations initially about temperature monitoring and how we were going to do that. Did it feel safe to identify a member of our staff team who was going to be responsible for this task? There are services available to help administer this work and process. And Dean can probably talk a little bit more about that as the Alley has engaged one of those companies. We have actually just followed a self-administered health check. So our full staff team has been trained on a daily health check that is required, including temperature monitoring if they are to come into the building to do work. This also applies to all contractors on site. So we've created essentially a tool that our folks have to use to ensure that we're being responsible in coming into the building. We have also purchased a thermal imaging system called Fever. I know the Museum of Fine Arts has this in use at this time for when we're able to return audiences on site. We will be taking temperatures of audiences. We had a lot of conversations about quarantine policy. Ultimately, it was simple for us because we're just following the guidance from the Texas Department of State Health Services. So if anybody obviously has demonstrated symptoms, regardless of whether they test positive or not, or if they have been in contact with somebody who is positive, they're essentially quarantining for a period of up to 14 days. There are guidance, clearance protocols essentially established by Texas Department of State Health Services for when those individuals can return to work. This is going to be really important for all of us to be thinking about. We have, in terms of size of businesses, a small team. We have 43 staff members. And over the past few weeks, we have had multiple staff members who are quarantined because of contact with COVID-19 positive individuals. So I'm sure that's going to increase, and it has a real impact on our ability to operate. Especially as we start to welcome back audiences at some point in the future. So this is going to be something that we all need to think about and have contingency plans in place, which we all know is very difficult from an artistic perspective, which is, I think, what makes our industry unique right now. We have contact tracing protocols that have been established and implemented by our HR manager who is administering that. And we have created a generous leave policy so that there's no incentive to return to work should somebody be experiencing symptoms or have contact with somebody who is positive. Finally, just wanted to touch on HVAC. For those of you who are responsible for venues, we have the benefit of having just opened a building, so we're able to work with the mechanical engineers and manufacturer of the system who installed in this facility. Because it is latest code system, its intake is about 50% of outdoor air, which is very positive. And there's a variable air, which means that there's continuous supply through the filters. We've installed MERV 13 filters, which are actually used in medical environments, everything outside of the operating room itself, which will capture 90% of particles, including COVID. This has all been fascinating learning. So we've done that, which is providing us a lot of assurance that we're capturing anything that might be traveling through our HVAC system. We have also received a quote for installing a UV light system that kills all bacteria on the cooling coils. It is very expensive, so actually not something that I think we're going to move forward with, but would provide essentially even more assurance that the air is safe. Happy to talk more about health and safety in our Q&A, just briefly touching on these two other ideas of programming and financial impact. Programming, our driving goal and philosophy is that we want to be flexible so that we can resume performances the moment we feel it is safe and responsible to do so. So for that reason, we're kind of in an unusual, a different circumstance than companies who have just decided that they're going to cancel for the next 6 months or beyond, and that we're driving forward all of our production processes with the goal of being ready should the moment come when we're able to gather again in person. That being said, we have canceled all performances, at least in the traditional sense of producing theater, through September. And so at this moment are expecting that we could produce in the traditional sense in October. We've been doing a lot of engagement online of our constituents, but have really just recently started digital artistic content. Last week, we had a reading online of a play by a emerging Black playwright that had over 1,500 people attend. And I share that as hopefully a good news story in this time of such negativity, because stages would never likely be able to gather 1,500 people in a room for a reading of a new work. So that has been really exciting and hopefully inspiring for what we're all going to be able to achieve in the months forward as we shift to this online strategy. We are also working to be able to bring together artists and audiences in some way when we think the moment is right, with essentially a limited audience participation solo artist series. We've removed the seats in our largest space and have built out the stage floor and created an environment where we can bring together 32 socially distanced audience members in groups of 2 with a solo artist who is essentially aesthetically in a recording studio on stage. So they are completely removed and separated from our audiences, reducing the risk of transmission through singing. So we've been thinking through what it is that we can do to be able to essentially tell stories in the months ahead. So maintaining a focus on our mission. Economically, it doesn't make sense, but we rely heavily upon philanthropy, and so I think it's a part of us being able to continue to do our work, which will ultimately create contributed revenue for us. Our plan was to start that series in the middle of July. We have then shifted that to the end of July. It is supposed to have been announced this week. Don't think it's the right week to announce a live performance series, nor do I believe it will be next week, probably not the week after. So we're just going to stay tuned to what's happening in our community, and certainly will not be doing that if it doesn't feel right for us to do, which I would say now it doesn't. We are planning on producing in the traditional sense starting in October. We have modified our programming to small casts, no live bands, and we'll build once we get into the new year with larger casts and live ensembles. We have not yet made a decision on social distancing in our theaters and want to provide ourselves the most flexibility. So we'll determine what that needs to look like as we get later into the fall before we open. Very quickly, financial impact, ultimately just going to identify that this is totally unknown for all of us. We had a board-approved budget last February of $6 million. That was modified just last week to $5.3 million, which on the surface might not seem very conservative of us, given the current conditions we're experiencing. There is a much higher reliance on philanthropy versus earned revenue in that budget. The budget does allow for some social distancing in our theaters, but certainly not for the full season. Also, it requires there to be market demand, and all of us are yet to find out if that exists. Ultimately, just driving towards the fact that we're all going to have to be paying close attention to what's happening financially on a weekly and monthly basis and making decisions in the moment. That's where we are.
Thank you, Mark. I think that also just wanted to be clear is that we recognize that there, like within the disciplines, that there's actually going to be some difference in terms of everybody's here is theater. We recognize that music and small ensembles might be similar, but vocal chamber ensembles have a whole different level of safety that they need to be thinking about. But I think that part of what Mark was saying is that how are we actually making sure that we are connecting to our national organizations or local organizations in order to understand what those guidelines are. I put some, if you look at the chat, Lauren has actually put some of those guidelines in there, and we will be able to share more of the guidelines after the panel or after today via an email from HIA. So that being said, Dean, would you like to take from here?
Okay. We've been having every couple of weeks, all the theaters get together and share information. I see a lot of you out there, and I feel like I'm going to be pretty redundant to a number of people. But the Alley has, being such a big institution, has a number of issues going on that you might not have. But I'll tell you. And I'm going to give you a little bit of our reopen plan. I've got it here, and if you would like a copy, it's not our finished plan, but it's where we're starting and where we're going. So you can email me at deang@alleytheater.org, and I'd be happy to email you a copy of it. Like everybody, we spend a lot of time reading and looking at other protocols around the country, and we, much like Mark had, a very specific staff committee that was in charge of putting together the protocols, and with all the different departments represented, and viewing all the CDC stuff, all the state stuff, all the local stuff. What other theaters around the country are doing. So it's a combination of all those things, but it will be added to as we learn more information and dealing with, as you know, the uncertainty of everything. When the governor 2 days ago says one thing and the next day says the next thing and the next day says the next thing. This is kind of the world that we live in. And so it's difficult to plan, and you're all dealing with this. We're all dealing with the same issues, and it's just really the number of zeros afterwards that make the difference. So the Alley is actually undergoing right right now a $6.5 million construction project. So we're mitigating the building from flooding for the 40-year flood plus 5 years. So the one good thing that came out of this is the fact that we're able to do all this construction and we're not performing, so they can get through faster. But what that means is our engineers are all working through this, and we have a couple of administrative people that have been working through this. The good news for us is administratively, I think we've got 4 people working, and we've got 15,000 square feet, so we've got lots of room to social distance. But we're dealing with all the protocols appropriately. For us, we've tried to create something that you might want to think about, and that is we've reduced the number of shows from an 8-play season to a 5-play season. We're just using the large theater to social distance, which we can get people 6 feet apart and still do about 35% of our house. We have about 776 seats, and they're right behind me. And we have gone ahead and just budgeted on that small of a house for the 5 plays that we're doing. And we've budgeted that small of a house for our Christmas Carol. We're actually doing a different Christmas Carol than we've done before because we can't do that big of a show and kids and all of that type of thing. So we're also leaning very heavy on our resident acting company. We're not going to bring anybody in from New York, whether it's designers or actors or anybody. Everything is going to be local. And it's just easier to handle the protocols. You don't have to deal with people coming in out of town and all of that. It's ironic that now, if you're from Texas, you have to quarantine if you go to New York, where it used to be the opposite. So we're kind of dealing with that. Then and then in terms of safety protocols, a lot of what you've heard. We are doing screening and tracking, and Mark mentioned that we have a group that we're working with. We've partnered with a group called Remedy, which is an urgent care platform that offers open air drive-through COVID-19 testing throughout Texas. And that's covered by our Blue Cross Blue Shield. So that's currently what we're doing. But one of the challenges will be, and we'll probably be partnering with the hospital. I know that the orchestra and the ballet and the opera are partnering with Methodist. We'll probably have to do it because we're going to have to do testing more often. We're going to obviously do it like when we're performing in a show. All the actors will get tested before they come in for first day of rehearsal. Then everybody's got to get retested before we do techs, everybody involved in techs, and etc. I think the scariest thing for all of us is what happens when somebody gets tested positive and you've been in rehearsal or you're in performance, and basically you're going to have to shut down, and then you're going to have to absorb all the costs that entails, and because you can't really have, like, for instance, like understudies, because all those people that were acting, if it's an actor, have been exposed, and so you can't have an understudy come in. You can't even do it. It doesn't work. We're having to work with Actors Equity. They haven't even defined what the protocols are. We have sent them our protocols, which is what they've asked us to do. We sent them to Actors Equity, United Scenic Artists, and stage directors and choreographers, so that they can work with us. And they're literally doing this with every theater across the country. If you have Actors Equity, actors on your stage, then you have to have a plan approved by them. And it's not just a plan for the season, it is a plan for each play. You have to resubmit a plan for each play. So it's pretty onerous, and that's going to be a challenge for all of us that have to deal with that. But those are the rules. We have all of this stuff. I can tell you about testing. One of the things that you do have to keep in mind is if you have volunteers that help you, they might not feel comfortable showing up. They might be older, and so you've got to figure out who's actually showing up so that you can handle these crowds, and how are you going to seat them. An in row and out row. You probably don't want to do things like concessions. I would recommend you don't deal with the concession issue. We're not dealing with it. Then you got to figure out how you're doing with the bathrooms. Everything, we've gone on hands-free so that they're all automated. And the same thing, hand dryers, you don't want to do the automated. You have to do paper for that, but you need to do automated for the soap dispenser. Those are all going to be important for you. You need to do the same thing for your performers. And so all of these things you have to think through, and how you're going to handle your audiences in and out, and are you going to have an intermission? The symphony is doing all their concerts without intermission. We have some plays with intermission. We have a pretty big facility. We think that we can handle an intermission, but quite frankly, our Christmas Carol doesn't have. I'm thrilled that it doesn't have an intermission, and so we're dealing with those issues. Now, you've also got to determine when do you want to open. I will tell you that we plan to open in October, but our backup plan is that we don't open in October. Then we move to December. If depending what happens, like we're seeing the spike right now, what's going to happen when all these kids go back to school? What's going to happen when all these college kids go back to college, which a lot of them are doing in August and September? Will they be out partying and doing things? And they're going to be close together, whether the classes are close together or not. They're social animals, and they're young, and they come home, and then you've got issues. So we're going to see a lot of stuff beyond our control out there in terms of spikes and things. And then how are we going to respond performance-wise? When Mark was saying, he's not announcing things right now, we're not announcing either. We've got our season that we're not even announcing because it's just not the right time to announce that stuff, because the public is focused on other things. So you have to kind of think all of these options through, of how you're being affected by what's going on out there. So we're having to figure out, and if we don't do Christmas, then we go to January. If we don't do January, then we go to February. We're looking at all those things. We have 104 employees that we have to pay through all of this. And so we're working out all the finances so that we can keep everybody going. And in fact, we're probably about the only theater with an equity company that's being paid right now in the country. So it is, you have to figure out all of your finances and make sense of what makes sense for you and what can you afford to fundraise and bring in order to keep people on or to do things or to keep the doors open, or how you're going to do that. So these are all things that you have to consider, and I'll wrap up right there.
Thanks, Dean. I think that as we hear it, like, these are incredibly complex issues, and that one decision and one variable shifts the entire plan. I think that what we've also heard is that we are creating multiple scenarios, and scenario after scenario after scenario. I think one of the also things that I also want to bring up is that we haven't even talked about the toll on our people in terms of our emotions and on our stress, and recognizing how are we actually even managing our own crises, and how are we actually thinking about ourselves in relationship to this moment. I think that this is unprecedented in terms of when we have gone through Harvey, when we've gone through the hurricanes, we can see that there's a process out. We do not know if there is a time frame out and what that might look like. So it's adding a whole another level of stress and uncertainty for us. So as we are also building and thinking about our plans for our organizations and our buildings and our artists, I'm also asking, how are we thinking about our plans for the employees, our staffs, and ourselves in order to make sure that we are maintaining a culture that actually is supportive of ourselves and the work. It can't always be just out at the external. I do want to also mention that at this point, Harris County, you do need a health and safety plan that at minimum requires masks to have anyone in your space right now. So as Dean was saying about the plans that he has to do, Harris County actually is requiring that currently. And we are continue to do that. Certain things are going to change. If you can check the chat room, again, there's like the chat, we have also posted in relationship to the return to work notes that Matt has been copying. I am also going to post a link to the Americans for the Arts survey. I encourage anybody who's actually, all of us, to be looking at Americans for the Arts, actually utilize them and their survey in order to kind of demonstrate what has been the impact financially and organizationally, so that we can demonstrate exactly, and we understand, and the Americans for the Arts can actually advocate for us beyond this. So there's been a lot of information, and I think it's now time to open up for questions. If you have, I'm going to try to do, we're going to try it, and we're going to see if we can all work together. If I unmute everybody and see if we can actually do this, or if anybody would actually like to, if anybody has a question now, can you put it in the chat? Or, okay, actually, Sarah, thank you very much. You've raised your hand. If anybody wants to talk, can you please raise your hand and we can unmute you. Sarah Loudermilk.
All right, thank you. So I think that both Mark and Dean were alluding to this. Are you all is everyone in general thinking that they're going to hold off on making any formal announcements until the time is more appropriate, understanding that you've got that season planned and your schedule planned in your back pocket ready to go? I'm getting some pushback from our artistic staff saying we should announce our vision and our plans knowing that we don't really have a schedule yet. And so I'm kind of hoping everybody can rally around me here and say, heck no, let's not do that just yet. So any thoughts on that, anybody?
Well, I think that every situation, you have to use some common sense on what's happening out in the public. And if you decide to announce at a time when everybody is worried and scared, you will do yourself a disservice. You want to see the rates and the hospitalizations going down, and you want to see everything going down, quite frankly. The challenge will be, of course, as they test more people, there's going to be more positive tests. But if the hospitalization rate keeps going down, when that happens, then you can point to something and say, you can make an announcement. But there's no right or wrong answer in terms of when's the right time, but it just makes common sense to let's do it on the downturn, and things look like they're flattening out.
Kind of on the flip side of this, I just got the email from the opera saying they've postponed everything, or they're canceling everything through February.
Yeah.
I would be interested to know what was kind of the trigger on making that. It seems like a drastic decision, but it also seems like it's well thought out. So
it's very well thought. It's very well thought out.
It's brilliantly thought out.
So our thinking is that the project we were due to do in January, February is the largest opera that one can really do in Parsifal. 100 people in the chorus, 85 people in the orchestra, etc., etc. And both whether we can keep people safe, which we can't, but also whether we can economically do a show that's going to cost $2.5 million for 1,500 people across 5 performances. The maths of that is pretty dizzying. It's 15 grand subsidy per seat, even opera bought. So it was a relatively easy decision, honestly. We need to start rehearsing Parsifal in October in order to get it ready for performances in January. So from our point of view, we're desperately trying to hold on to the spring of next year, and none of the news that is coming out about testing and singers in particular and their ability to project spit in huge distances is any good news at all for us. So we're really struggling as an art form. I was on an Opera America call just a minute ago, and the vast majority of opera companies are really talking about whether they'll get back on in 21, let alone this year. So that's why we made that decision. And again, we felt it better to make the decision relatively early and be clear. I think it will become an absolute no-brainer decision, but we just couldn't in any way see a way of making that safe in January.
Thank you, Perrin, because I think one of the things that it's been great is to see is that this is a great opportunity for us to be transparent with our audiences and our patrons as to what is happening behind the scenes and what's happening in terms of, like, with, as Perrin said, what's happening for February actually starts, all that planning and all the physical stuff is happening in October. How are we actually how are we making sure that our audiences and everybody that we're involved with recognizes how much planning, how much work is requiring well before they come into that space, and are we actually translating that and actually taking advantage of that opportunity in order to say what's going on? Are there questions? Anybody raise your hand? Tony, you got to, yes, hold on one second, Tony.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that, just as a counterweight, Sarah, and I don't want to make things more confusing, but as a really small organization, Musica felt like we actually had to talk about what we still wanted to do this year. And so we made a really strong effort to say, you know, right up front that we don't actually know how it's going to play out, but here are the 3 things that we love that we're still trying to do. So, I mean, I think we tried to split the difference, but we felt like us saying nothing made us much more likely to just disappear completely, and that we actually needed to talk to our potential audience.
Yeah,
Thank you,
I think
Tony.
now is the time to have a strategy of talking to your audience periodically, because whether it's on Facebook or whether it's on direct emails, if you don't, then you'll be forgotten. And plus, people that support you, they want to hear from you. They love you. That's why they come. So it's important all throughout this process that we talk to our audiences.
So I think that, like, as we mark in terms of the notes, think about your communication plan. Think about, like, how are you continuing to cultivate your people, and recognize that in what ways do you, like, as Tony and Sarah are saying, you all need to decide, like, organizationally, individually, what are those causes, but please continue to communicate with people and make sure that this is the opportunity to take that. Anybody continue? If there's any questions, please raise your hand or throw it into the chat. Because when I've seen some, like, you know, I've seen the ARTs kind of return to work. One of their big things was communication plan. How are you doing it? What is what are you transmitting? What are you communicating at any moment? Okay, Lyndon Wong, what does this mean for Music Cares? I'm not sure. I'm going to try to find you and unmute you in order so that you can ask that question. There you go.
Sorry about that. I just, we pay for music card. I just paid.
Oh.
And so, you know, that's all about programming. So how are you going to print out music card for, how's the camera going to come up with that?
I think that's a big question as to also how much, what are you actually handing to people, and handing things out is always a good question. Somebody was going to answer that question?
Yeah, this is Brandon Bell from Decamera. Lyndon, I'm happy to have Leo get in touch with you about that. I actually don't know what's going on with the music cards. You know, presumably there's not going to be any programming that will require music cards, you know, through December, it seems, at least. But I will have, I'll have Leo get in touch with people about music cards and kind of I'll let him take that conversation.
That's great. Thanks.
So I guess I also want to make sure that, like, we have Dean and Mark and Jeanette who gave some information about, like, you know, their return to work plan. At this point, this is actually about the panel, and see if there's questions that we have for them, or these general questions that are asking. And then in the breakout questions, if the breakout groups following this, I think that there'll be more opportunity in order to talk a little bit and parse out some specifics around each organization and some thoughts around that. So I guess just want to make sure that we are able to take opportunity of this moment to see what are some of the big questions and some of the big ideas that we need to be thinking about as a sector within the arts field, particularly. So I think that, some of the other things that I heard about what is actually, what are we doing in terms of virtual programming? What does that look like? How does, what opportunities does that create? And then also, what if we're going into that realm, as Mark said, what are the costs in order to be able to make that happen? And what are the things that we are investing in that might be a little differently in terms of what that programming might look like? Sarah, you have another question?
Well, this is more facility related. We're struggling because we don't have our own facility. We don't have control over it. So we've started investigating alternate venue possibilities that we could use that aren't being used because of social distancing requirements. So I'm wondering if anybody out there has found any great solutions to facility challenges, if and when we're able to convene as an orchestra for rehearsals. We've talked to, I can't remember the name of the theater now, the new guys that just finished building over there on D'Amico. Anyway.
Stages.
Thank you. It is Stages, yeah. Thank you, Stages. Thanks, Mark. We've been talking with them. I don't know if it's going to be big enough for us, but I'm just wondering if there's anybody out there has a facility that they're not going to be using in the fall that they might want to get some rent income from. So I'm just throwing that out there, or any other ideas like convention center stuff.
Sarah, so you should definitely, let's connect after the meeting. Houston first, we'll definitely be able to talk, but the idea right now is to turn the Cullen into a virtual studio, which would not be big enough for you, but the Brown stage might well allow you to be able to stay space enough to do recordings and work. It probably isn't an audience option, but let's reconnect after the meeting.
Wonderful. Thank you, Perrin.
So I think that Sarah and Perrin bring up this really great idea of how are we thinking about shared resources? How are we thinking about spaces? How are we thinking about even back end, and even what Jeanette brought up earlier in terms of safety and being able to purchase in bulk safety items? Are these things that we need to be thinking of as a group or in smaller groups in order so that we can come together as a sector and actually take advantage of the moment? And how, in terms of space, in terms of equipment, how are we actually sharing opportunities and sharing access, and so that we continue to help strengthen each other, if that is even a possibility.
Hey, Sixto, can I add one thing really quickly to
Matt.
Sarah's point? We've been using a new venue called the Institute of Contemporary Dance. This is Marlena Doyle's new venue. It has three, it's just on North Houston Avenue. It's really beautiful. They have three black box studio areas. They're similar in size, and we've been using that, for the quartet. And I think it would be safe for, up to a dozen or so people. So just maybe I'll put the link in the chat here, and you can check it out. We've been renting it for about $35, $40 an hour. There's a nonprofit discount, so it's a really great resource.
Also, in terms of we have what are our typical performance venues, but are there ways in which that we are connecting to churches who are thinking this, where there are ways that we're thinking about outdoor venues? And Cynthia Alvarado, we had a conversation about some of the parks, and I think that there's potential opportunities, but they are also working with their own systems. And so how we have been thinking and being able to be flexible is actually a really important question right now. And in what ways can we go back to the core of what our projects are and core of what our work is, and focus on that, and then be able to think about how that is what we need to be, and how we engage audiences around that core process and that core idea, instead of kind of thinking about what we have done consistently over the course of the past few years. Yes, Robin.
Just to take that a little bit further, I participated in the Dance USA conference last week, and I know in Boston, the city was also using some sports venues as alternative spaces. So just curious to know if this committee or if the city, if there's been discussion in alternative outdoor venues being utilized as well.
So I think that that's a good question, Robin. I'm not sure that, like, in terms of the service organization calls, I'm not sure that we've actually talked about it, but I think that I'm not involved in all of those conversations. If there's anything that's in terms of an update for that, I think that'll be included in the email that we have that goes out afterwards, but it's a great point. I am going to be cognizant of a time, like we're about at 1 o'clock. I am grateful to our panelists. Thank you, Jeanette, Mark, and Dean, and thank you, Perrin, and everybody else who's contributed into these questions. We are going to be transferring everybody who is staying in performing arts into their breakout rooms. And if you're going to visual arts, if you're going to arts education, you're going to need to hang up from this Zoom call and find your other link in order to join into the arts like whatever other group that might be. It is great to see so many faces. It is great to see you all. It's good to be part of this sector and this community, and I look forward to the points in which we continue to share the work and can either be together again like this or also be together in person. Thank you all for being here, and we're going to transfer you into your breakout rooms.